So I'm moderating the panel, and we will be having a conversation with our panellists very soon. But I just wanted to say a few words of introduction first. So we're here to talk about interactive storytelling and the power of storytelling. And I want to try and leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions. I can't promise it, but that's what we're aiming to do. So today I'd like us to actually step into the shoes of the user or the audience, whatever you want to call it. And I want to ask you to think about the following question. How do we create interactive stories that are emotionally engaging, lasting, transformative, they delight, they give us surprise, they give us wonder? And I just want to ask a couple of questions when you're thinking about that as well. Are classical storytelling techniques still essential to create rich interactive experiences? Namely, a clear premise with dramatic stakes and tension, clear character motivation for the user with barriers that they must overcome to gain their payoff, their dramatic payoff. So in games, that's their rewards, and a journey that often has some sort of beginning, middle, and end. Or is that all completely irrelevant? And are we at the point where we need to invent different narrative styles and a new storytelling toolkit to exploit the potential of the latest technologies? And the other thing, thank you, my clicker, I've forgotten. So we're going to have a discussion with the panelists in a second, but we're really going to be looking at what the potential of storytelling is, and particularly interactive storytelling. So what is the range of interactive storytelling possibilities that I can expect as an audience member over the next 5 years? Please ask yourself that question. So let's start the conversation by finding out about our speakers. So we have Chris Panzetta in the middle, who's the Managing Director of S1T2. Chris started S1T2 with his mates while studying at the University of New South Wales. Flunking most of his subjects to do it, they spent the last 7 years together making it worthwhile. It's been a grey herring adventure of exploring technologies to find new ways of storytelling that's given them the chance to deliver some world and Australian firsts alongside some immensely gifted and creative minds. At the end of it all, Chris hopes he can scrape enough together to buy back his uncle's farm. So we're going to hold you to that. Then there's James Bush on the he's waving, which is good. James is the co-founder and creative technology director at Streaker. James started out making and breaking things from a young age after being given a screwdriver set at age 5. He calls it being curious, but his mum called it bloody annoying. As co-creator of the 2015 Titanium Lion-winning campaign Clever Boy, James has helped shine a light on the role of technology and innovation in marketing campaigns. James is passionate about connecting brands with technology, building memorable experiences, and solving real-world problems. And on my immediate left is Joel Beath, Head of Content, Loud&Clear. Upon realising that there were no jobs available that involved reading Tintin and building Lego, Joel, alongside his brother, started Loud&Clear. In the 6 years since it started, Loud&Clear has grown to over 50 highly creative individuals solving tech problems for some of Asia Pacific's largest organisations. As head of content at Loud&Clear, Joel gets to create content-driven digital programs that excite, delight, and often terrify audiences. So let's start by having a conversation with the speakers. We're going to start with Joel. And we're going to take up this word terrify. So, Joel, can you give us an insight into the campaign that you created to promote the feature film Kill Me 3 Times?
Yeah, sure. So Kill Me 3 Times, it's an Aussie film, and it was directed by Kriv Stenders and stars Simon Pegg. The producers initially sent us the script, and they asked us if there was anything in that script that we'd be able to pull sort of a point of immersion or something that would create a transmedia experience from the script. So we really poured over the script looking for something that we felt would lend itself to a really exciting and sort of immersive user experience. We kept coming back to the opening scene in which Simon Pegg's character, who's a hitman called Charlie Wolf, chases this sort of hapless victim Sam across the Western Australian sand dunes and kills him. And looking through the rest of the script, we're looking for a reason why this Sam guy got killed. Was there some sort of Tarantino-esque flashback later on? But it actually didn't exist. This guy was purely there as a prop to set up Charlie Wolf as a killer, as a pretty malevolent one. So I thought there's something really fascinating in actually exploring this guy who really only lasts for 2 minutes in the entire film, but creating a bit of a backstory for him, finding out why he was there, but beyond that, actually making the audience complicit in the reason as to why he's there, and making the audience partly responsible for why he gets killed. So we created this 3-day transmedia experience, a bit of an immersive experience, and maybe we can play the rabbit hole video.
Yep.
This is how we kicked it off.
Hang on, where's the...
Shut up!
Just a heads up, this gets a little bit violent.
What the
I don't know where the money is. I never seen the money. Shh. Oh, mate, come on. Come on, Sammy, it's me. Well, I did say shush. Charlie just wants to have a word with you. What? Huh? No, Sammy, mate, come on, Sammy! Oh, for fuck's sake, Charlie. You said you just wanted to have a word with him. Oi! Oi, you! You come back here! Oi! Now they got away. For now. Yeah, look, I'm sorry, Charlie. Okay. Yeah, okay, I'm on my way. Fuck.
Oh, I didn't send this piece of work to my mother, by the way. So essentially, you experience filming a murder, you get away, it's obvious the killers have found you, but you think you get away. And that's really it. You watch the video, you go back to your business, whether it's working or it's the weekend, you're playing golf, whatever you're doing, and nothing really happens. And then about 4 hours later, you get the first text straight to your mobile phone. And it's a text message from the killers, and they're letting you know that they've tracked you. They know who you are. And that's followed closely by a phone call saying, delete the footage or we're coming to get you. We really wanted to create this experience of being hunted and this sort of idea of this noose tightening around you over the 3 days. So that's sort of where it really kicks off. Over the next 3 days, not only are the killers chasing you, but the cops manage to track your phone to the location of the body, and they start pursuing you as well. They're calling you, and they release your photo to the media, so all of a sudden there's newspaper headlines popping up. And beyond that, your friends start seeing the newspaper headlines. So we used the Facebook API to actually send real emails from your friends. So you'd get an email from one of your buddies into your inbox saying, hey, Joel, what the hell's going on here, mate? Your newspaper's splashed all over the place, or the cops have been calling me. We wanted to sort of reflect on, or sort of mirror what the characters in the film felt as they were pursued and hunted. There's Facebook videos, there's videos which are sent to you, and it's using green screen technology. It's got the killer standing in front of a wall, and on it there's photos of your family, your friends, in my case, my kids, which was sort of relatively horrifying. We use location data to show the cafes near where you live, so these drinking holes that you might have been to. A map with a big red circle around it, actually showing your location and where you actually live. And so people sort of had this experience from mild discomfort to, in some cases, terror. Probably the most horrifying experience was a couple of people who were in a meeting and they had voice to text on, and all of a sudden it just popped up with a voice to text message saying, this is so-and-so from the homicide squad, I need to speak to you about a murder. So it was pretty interesting, but it all played out on your device as well. It was on your mobile phone, it was on your Facebook, it was on your Twitter, and it was coming at you from all different angles. And I was really passionate about making sure the user didn't have to visit an installation or visit any websites other than the initial rabbit hole website, and that it would feel like the entire experience was actually chasing you rather than you going somewhere to chase the experience. I won't ruin the ending, but it sort of funneled perfectly into the opening scene of the film, creating a really nice sort of closing the loop for users as to why that guy gets killed in the first scene.
Fantastic description, completely terrifying. You live up to your bio. But we may quickly go now to Chris, because we're going to get a real range of interactive sort of storytelling experiences through the speakers, and we'll come back to some of Joel's key points afterwards. So Chris, can you talk about VR and your work on the Wallabies?
So I help run S1T2, which stands for Story First, Technology Second. So I guess that key little thing in the center is we really fundamentally believe that the best form or the longest form of communication we always have is storytelling. So we try and explore new technologies and new ways of doing that. And that means we do a lot of different types of things. So the two things I guess we want to show or showcase, the first was, I'll just talk over the video I guess, was a project with the HSBC last year for their sponsorship with the Wallabies. So their whole idea was that HSBC wanted to provide access that no one else could through their services, so we wanted to do an immersive 360 video experience on the Samsung Gear VR, which was essentially a day in the life of the Wallabies. So what it feels like to be a Wallaby and things like that, from training to the change room where Michael Check is screaming at you to running out on the field type of thing, which was a really interesting experience working with athletes in that environment where you can't have a director in the room or anyone else, and they're kind of there to their own devices. But yeah, and this was a kind of an experiential marketing experience which lived in Pitt Street Mall for a few days. So we built a whole transmedia living room and things like that to showcase it in. A social channel, so basically people would register on an application we built. We'd record their experience live, so we'd intersplice the footage they're experiencing with their footage and then post that out to social channels. But I think the key idea there was to use the immersion of 360 video and the capabilities to actually let you feel like you're in that experience or interacting with those people. I guess I'll talk about more the limits of those interactions later.
Yeah. Actually, just whilst we're on that topic though, so, I mean, it's fantastic work. What would take it to the next level of interactivity? What would that look like?
To be interactive, I guess. So the problem with like a lot of these 360 videos is essentially you are looking around, which I think is a fundamentally interactive experience because you can see everywhere, but it's not responsive to you in that type of environment. So there's a scene where Stephen Moore, the captain, walks up to you and he's like, oh, here, welcome, how you going, mate, da-da-da. And you're too busy looking around like, holy crap, I'm in this world. And if that was a real experience with Stephen Moore, then he's going to hit you over the head for not paying attention to him. And because there's no consequence to your interactions or actions, you lose a sense of that believability or your respect for that character or that world. It kind of breaks the immersion. And I think that's a big challenge with these 360 videos or trying to make these VR movies is what the perspective is. So we've done other VR works where you're not so much the first person, you're third person and how that feels.
And I imagine that you probably don't put everything right behind the character, like the main action. I mean, how do you sort of like, where do you put the main action? Do you just sort of put it within a 270-degree view, or?
Well, it's different to Joel's, I guess, problem is because essentially you're creating for a bespoke device and experience. Why not use the 360 if you can, because that's kind of half of the immersion. But largely, we don't spend a lot of our time doing this.
Yep.
We do, like, everyone's looking forward, I'm looking forward, so most of your action's there, but you do want to make use of that experience for immersion, whether it's just basic sound and things like that. So you don't want to throw it away, but you don't want to you have to give someone a really good reason to turn their neck.
Yep, sure.
Unless they're on a swivel chair. It's, they're not going to do it.
You might get sick otherwise.
Most people don't even know you can, to be honest. Most people with their first VR experience, they just sit there and look forward, and you have to tell them, please look behind yourself,
Yep. So all of the speakers work on a big variety of work, some of which is confidential, some of it which is out in the public domain. There's another work of yours which is more in the art installation area, Affinity. Can you talk about that as well?
Yeah, so we were lucky enough to, in 2014, we did a vivid artwork for Pollinate Energy, which do solar power panels in India for people off the grid. So we created an installation for that. thanks to RBM, they were doing some analytics, did pretty well, and so Vivid invited us back. But we didn't have a client. It was just kind of an art piece. And around the same time, my grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so we kind of wanted to see how we could tell maybe that story through an interactive installation. So this is what we ended up doing, which was, if you went to Vivid, you might have seen it. But essentially, it was a giant, I think it was 15 meters by 8 meters installation, which was visually supposed to represent the neurons and connections of the human brain. So the idea at Vivid is if you're standing back from it and looking at this kind of lights shooting everywhere and creative experience, it was like supposed to represent the vibrancy of the human brain. And as people could come up and interact with it, you would touch one of the neurons, the colors would spread out of it and throughout the network of the actual installation. The more people socially connected on that same neuron would create different colors and would mean you could, your color could kind of propagate further through the piece. But throughout, to basically tell the story of Alzheimer's is, from the start of the night, it was this beautiful angelic white canvas, and then the representative color of Alzheimer's is purple, so over the night, that color purple would propagate throughout the network and kind of dim your colors, and you couldn't do so much social interaction. And what was awesome from that was Alzheimer's Hysteria jumped on board just before and let us bring it to Melbourne, just over, I think it was near the theatre. And what we could do then was we had a bit more budget to put some actual stories inside each neuron. So we would record memories of carers, of sufferers from Alzheimer's in each ball. And as you'd walk through, you could kind of piece together the lives of people through that sculpture and experience, which
Fantastic.
is really cool.
Fantastic. We might now go to James, who has a completely different interactive experience to show us. Would you like to talk about Google Cube? Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I'm going to talk to you about Google Cube, which you may or may not have seen. Google Cube was a project we worked on with Google Creative Lab. It's very much one of Tom Uglow's ideas. And I've known Tom for a long time, and we moved out to Australia independently, but around about the same time, and we'd work together in London. And we used to get together and have these like really nerdy conversations, and it was generally two English people in a room moaning about stuff. But we'd also come up with some ideas that we thought would be interesting. And Tom kind of set this challenge of, whilst Google's this amazing storytelling platform, it's not particularly interactive. Whilst you can annotate videos and you can link them together and do lots of interesting things, it hasn't really evolved since it launched as a platform. And we wanted to create a storytelling platform that allowed you, the user, to decide kind of what happens next or what you wanted to see. And we built a ton of prototypes, everything from multiple YouTube videos on a single web page and that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until we started playing around with geometric shapes, and Tom and I are kind of big advocates of like tactile stuff and playing around with materials and that kind of thing. So the idea was, hey, maybe we could put videos onto a cube. And so we started looking at how we could use WebGL technologies and that kind of stuff. And so essentially what we built was a cube in WebGL, and then we mapped the videos onto it. The first place we rolled it out was for semi-permanence. We worked with the Australian director, Steve AYSON, who you can see on screen right now. And he went away and came up with with one story that was told through 6 sides of the cube, and then we rolled the cube out as a separate platform at Google. We did an interactive music video for the presets. The cancer charity did I Touch Myself, a 6 female vocalists doing an a cappella. And then they've rolled it out for kind of different advertising platforms as well. But the really nice thing about the cube is that it was a very tactile experience. You could go into the exhibition space at semi-permanent and pick up the physical cube and then rotate it and see how that reflected on a larger screen. But it also worked on mobile and desktop devices as well.
Yep. And James, all of these guys work a lot with different brands. Do you want to talk briefly about the value of interactivity for brands? So maybe you could reference the AFTRS work.
Yeah, I mean, it's my background is very much web development, and then I moved into the advertising side, and ad agencies are always looking at ways to be able to tell stories in different mediums, and it's kind of felt like a natural extension for brands to look at how they can tell different stories within different media. So, and part of my role is to look at technology and say, how can we use it in interesting ways and not just for the sake, you know, technology for technology's sake, because it becomes boring quite quickly. So we started looking at how we could solve real-world problems. So as Liz mentioned, I worked on Optus Cleverboy, and that came out of a proactive brief of how we could make a network tangible or how we could illustrate the power of the network. And so we just came up with this harebrained idea that it would be really cool if you could detect sharks and then use the Optus network to say, hey, there's been sharks detected at your local beach. So we built a physical prototype for that, but a big part of it was being able to tell the story. So we made case study films and brought it to life through animations and that kind of stuff. And the storytelling aspect of solving the problem was probably as important as the prototype that we actually delivered as well.
And do you, either of you want to make any quick comments about the value of interactive storytelling for brands?
Just a short point that a lot of the stuff we're doing at the moment with immersive and interactive stories is with brands, and a lot of it's in the training and development area, and we're just seeing much better responses. Anytime you can present anything, and James is right, you don't just want to do it for the sake of technology, but for example, doing a work care video where you can actually look around a room and spot the things that you know, might cause infractions or might cause safety issues is obviously going to be so much better for an audience than just scrolling through a PowerPoint or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the best thing about it is you actually get to put people inside, like you get them to interact with the brand and kind of put them inside that brand world. I think what's challenging coming from not the advertising side for us, but working with brands is they can't be as explicit sometimes as they want to be. It's more like what our brand feels like or what emotion we want to kind of transcribe, rather than like a whole feature list. Normally it's like bringing that feature to life in an amazing way and immersing them in that. But yeah, you've got to kind of be less on the language, I guess, all the time.
So we've touched on limitations of interactivity, and we've also touched on how it really works well, particularly when you're putting the person inside the brand, so to speak. Sounds a bit strange. So can we just expand a little bit more about when does an interactive experience work really well? Is it about the content? Is it about the story? You know, what is it that makes it work? What keeps the illusion?
I'll have a crack at answering that one. I'll just reflect back on Kill Me 3 Times. It wasn't about, and I think James made a really good point, it's not just for the sake of technology, it's about finding a point where you can actually really enhance the story, and there's a reason why you're creating an immersive experience. I think there's a lot of people who just sort of, it's a bit of a buzzword at the moment to create immersive content, and that's what they want to do, so it's created for the sake of being created, but actually spending the time and research and exploring I guess the brief to actually really understand why this will add value is, for me, where you create a really good immersive story.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to make any comment, James?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting that the type of work that Joel does is very different to the type of work I do, but I used to work in the kind of very much interactive storytelling space in terms of creating interactive experiences for brands and how you tell those stories. And I worked on a big project for Nike, which was called Your Time Is Now. And essentially the original idea that the agency came up with was a 30-second TV spot that was going to be aired in the halftime break of the Champions League final. And the media buy, so sorry to any media people in the room, was ridiculous. It was like tens of millions of dollars for 30 seconds. And the production budget was pretty high. And we said, this is kind of ridiculous. We could make an interactive film for the same money, and you wouldn't spend 10 or 20 million on the media buy. Turns out they'd booked it anyway and they were going to run it. But we turned a 30-second TV spot into a 12-minute interactive film. And more people actually saw the film in the 30-second break than they actually watched than watching the game live, because the way they curated the story and kind of set it up is that it drove people who are huge fans of soccer to go and seek out the experience and experience it and share it with their friends. Yeah. And you could interact with the film in a huge number of ways. You could watch it passively for 30 seconds, or you could kind of fall down these rabbit holes, is what we called it. And so the football fans who knew about Messi or were fans of Pep, the coach, and that kind of stuff could interact with them on an individual level. And we were seeing like huge engagement times, but it meant that you could discover something that someone else hadn't discovered, and then you would share it, and that would continue the story by saying, hey, did you go and get your hair cut in the Nike barber shop? And that kind of stuff. And at the time, Nike had done a partnership with Sega, so we actually put Sonic the Hedgehog game inside the film, so then you could go and play Sonic the Hedgehog and all this kind of stuff. And there was all these little Easter eggs and things. I think that's the stuff where people actually kind of want to interact with brands, and they'll talk about the brand in a more positive way rather than just watching a 30-second TV ad.
And do you think that comes down to that piece of interactive storytelling basically being underpinned by key storytelling techniques and good ideas? Like, what's the kind of basis? I mean, it can also go horribly wrong. A lot of the times, interactive stuff is just not very exciting.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid point. I think you've got to know your audience. That I think like Joel's example is great, because if you're into that kind of horror genre and movies and films, it's great because it's got that excitement level and all that kind of stuff. And I think if you talk to the audience in the right way and you understand the people that you're talking to, so with the Nike soccer thing, football fans are massively passionate about the sport, about their team, about certain players. I think if you can bring that into the story, then you'll get people to engage. But I think it's very easy for brands to get it wrong, and you know, if you're trying to overly sell something with the Nike thing, albeit it's about soccer and they want you to buy jerseys and boots and that kind of stuff, there wasn't one particular piece where at any point you could buy a product or you were encouraged to buy a product. Yeah. It was just about getting you to engage with the brand.
I think you also need to define, like, you don't use technology for technology's sake also, but don't interact just for interactivity's sake. You have to have kind of the goal of your interaction should always be some kind of agency. So this feeling of impacting that fictional world or whatever it is in a meaningful way. So even if it's simple as you've just hit something and there's a nice juicy animation and there's a score, that's meaningful to someone. But there's a lot of experiences or where interactivity can go really wrong is when someone's gone to the effort to interact with the piece and you're not getting a good enough response, you kind of lose them, I think, in the design.
Yep. Just extending on that, you've actually done quite a bit of writing in the VR space, and you've written about keeping the illusion of interactivity. What other things do you kind of need? What are the other ingredients that you need to keep the illusion real, make it authentic, so people believe it?
Specifically for VR?
Yes.
Yeah, so VR is really, the best thing about VR, obviously, and everyone's why it's hyped and probably getting overhyped, in my opinion, is it's really good at immersion right out of the box. So essentially, a lot of what you try and do when you're creating like a physical exhibition or something like that is create this immersive space that people can kind of get lost in. And VR does that out of the box. It's amazing. You put it on, I feel like I'm there. Where you had to use all these tools in film and literature to put you in there, VR can get you there very early. But there's all these other things, obviously, that can break anything that can break that immersion kind of makes it a horrible experience. And so there's all these other tools and technology tools and design tools we need to kind of work with. So a lot of what we're doing, the scope of VR stuff we have is you've got the live action VR stuff, which you see with your Samsung Gears, which these days is largely limited to live action 360 video. Then you've got your DK2, which is your like Oculus Rifts, your Vives, which we're working with real-time engine environments and things like that, which let us be more interactive with controllers or things like the Lighthouse. And then you've got the next level of what we're trying to do, which is using like motion capture systems to actually use kind of like real physical products, real physical world. And the whole reason we do that is because I guess the fundamental goal of any virtual reality system today in 100 years should be to create this concept of presence. So feeling there, like we all feel present right now, not just immersed. And the more senses we can kind of, it's almost like an equation, the more senses you can stack up helps. And that's a technological issue, but it's also a design issue. So you should design your experience by scripting the interaction, I guess. Like if you see a teapot, people are going to expect that they can pick up that handle, or that's a tool you can use. So if they can't do it, don't have it in there.
So you need to engage as many of your senses as possible in the experience.
Well, we're really intelligent in that, and we're so used to things happening in the real world. Virtual reality is trying to somewhat replicate that. You need to be able to give people ideas of what they can and can't do, because otherwise, like that, the Wallabies won again. Or even, we did a Dreamtime story for, which is for Tibergargan, which is this mountain giant and things like that. And the difference there was we didn't make you the first person, we didn't make you the character, we made you kind of this observant, this observer, 10,000, 40,000 years ago. And it kind of felt like Scream, where you're screaming at the girl to get out of the room when the murderer's in the room, but the difference is you're in the room, so it feels kind of weird you can't do anything or get away or run away, and that breaks the immersion, I think.
Yep.
So it's difficult.
That was for me the biggest frustration with Kill Me 3 Times as well, is that it was, as an immersive story it worked well, as an interactive story it was terrible. In that you were receiving text messages and phone calls, but we didn't have the budget to necessarily be able to respond to those things. So what was traditionally a relatively normal human behaviour in receiving a phone call or receiving a text message, a large part of you wanted to go, hang on, what's this about? Or, okay, I'll delete the footage. Or, okay, what do you want me to do? Or if the cops called you, you want to answer and say, hey, it's not me. We didn't have that level of interactivity. So
you want a whole bunch of actors basically planted on phones that can actually
even just
respond.
a few times, and with more budget, we'd mapped it out and it could have been done. With more budget, we could have actually had that, at least a few sections, which would have been incredible. But yeah, unfortunately, it was immersive but not interactive.
So just keeping on your experience with Kill Me 3 Times for a moment, you also had that in other countries as well. How did you kind of organise that experience in other countries? How did you do it?
So, the film was released obviously worldwide, and we had to create an experience that was global as well. What we also wanted to make sure didn't happen was that people wouldn't receive a phone call at 4 a.m. in the morning, or whenever it might be, from the cops or from a killer telling you that you need to delete the footage or they'll come after you. So we created a piece of software which basically was geo-timed, and depending on where they were, that's when it released the thing. So it was only done during business hours, but it was a pretty complicated piece to do because we had the UK timed, we had US timed, we had Australia timed as well, and there were a few things people had some people had geo blockers on, so they were receiving phone calls pretty early in the morning.
And did it work, the campaign?
Yeah, I mean, look, it had 10,000 people through it, and we weren't able to track those people into a theatre, but it definitely got some really great PR. It was really good earned media in the US, UK as well, and was picked up by some pretty heavy blog or film websites as well.
So almost that experience becomes its own thing.
Yeah, exactly. It was it was attached to the film, but it was certainly its own story.
Yep. So we might actually go forward 2 clips, please. I'm not quite sure how to do it on this. That's possible. And we might actually change gear for a moment, and we might start talking about the future. Okay, so that's pretty cool. That's from Magic Leap's website. And Magic Leap actually announced that they had $793 million of new funding last week. They have money from a number of different companies, including Google. So a lot of people are backing that that Magic Leap are doing great work, and that potentially they may influence the future of storytelling. Thoughts? Where are we? How close are we to this experience?
I think it's easier to predict where things are going. It's really hard to predict how long it'll take. I'm really skeptical, and I really would be wanting to prove wrong. But you look at, I think everything's moving. Graphic processing units and stuff are getting better and faster and stuff like that. But it's still to render to do that type of experience in the next couple of years, I'd be very, very surprised. That's definitely what you want to happen. You don't want so much devices and putting headsets on. You want these things to become more wearable and ingrained, in the human experience. But I think the future of interactive storytelling is massive because of this. I think this is all these things we're talking about. I feel like interactive story hasn't worked for 40 years or for ages because we haven't had the tools. But processing, procedural environments, kind of gesture tracking, it's all getting much better to have those platforms. Then we have to start writing the genres and the conventions of those things, which film and everything have, but it's going to take time. I think it's going to be a generational thing, because it's not just that Magic Leap can come out with that tomorrow, and then we all have to learn how to create with that and what works, what audiences don't like and what they like.
And I suppose what happens if you've got all these fantastic, cool tools, but you've got no content because you haven't caught up with actually how to create content for those platforms?
Well, and it's a business case too. I mean, Oculus released their headsets are $600 a pop. Like, how many people are going to buy them? And then game developers who are the primary kind of content creators, they have to do the math. And I can create like 1 billion PC consoles or, 1 million headsets. And so until it becomes, like, it's good, Google's jumping on board, Apple's, I think, announcing it. As before it becomes ubiquitous, it's going to be hard to justify those experiences. And I guess the last thing, the problem is with interactive story, you have all the difficulties of creating a normal narrative like a film, plus the added difficulty of interactivity and all that extra content as well. So it's very expensive, but hopefully, we get there.
Okay. What are the other game changers that we're seeing maybe before the one we just saw on the screen?
In terms of physical tech, or
In terms of possibilities for storytelling, of technological development?
I think in the tech space there's loads of really interesting things. I think personally the next thing will be haptic. It sounds like the obvious thing to say, but it's the thing that's advancing at probably the fastest rate and coming down in cost. That you can go and buy some haptic motors.
Can we just explain what you'll be able to do with haptic technology?
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know, haptic technology at the most basic level is vibration. So if you think about a Sony PlayStation controller or a rumble pack on an old Mega Drive or whatever it was, and it vibrated when you fired the gun or drove a car over the curb or something like that, that's haptic at the very, very basic level. But at the other extreme, it's being used in medical research and surgery for surgeons to be able to operate on someone without kind of even being in the room, that they're essentially controlling a robotic arm and getting haptic feedback to understand how hard to touch something and all that kind of stuff. But as I was saying, you can go out and buy that technology now. You can buy haptic motors for like $1 from Element 14 or, JCar. And with a small amount of programming, you can go and build an electrical circuit that gives you feedback based on a user input. So I can say, press this button, and by pressing this button, something happens, which is a very basic example. But and we're all used to it, that within the new iPhone, you get that haptic feedback by, the force touch and that kind of stuff. And we can incorporate that into storytelling if we think it's, relevant and it adds to the experience.
So if you're doing a virtual reality experience and you come across something, you'll get pushback, you'll get feedback.
Yeah, exactly. There was a great example. I forget who's created it, but it was showcased at CES in January out in Vegas. And they were controlling a kitchen hob, which I thought was a weird example, but they basically had their hand above the hob, and they were getting haptic feedback through the air so that they could feel how tactile the knob was and how far to turn it and the feedback and that kind of stuff. And that's, the kind of the really interesting stuff, so that if, Chris is creating a VR thing, that to his point, that why put a teapot in a scene if you can't pick up the teapot? Because as humans, we normally see teapots and think we can pick it up. But if you could feel something or an object that's there, then to be able to add that level in makes sense.
Sure. Do you want to say something else? You okay?
Oh yeah, just quick, because I think there's a lot of the input and gesture technology to go, but I think what would be really interesting is when we see development of more social physics in kind of game models, and with kind of the advent of AI over the few years. So we've been really good at developing kind of collision detection and things like that, so our games are much more precise, but incorporating social physics of what it means for, there's a really good example of a game it's a bit old now, called Facade, which essentially it's based on a novel for Virginia Woolf, and you have to navigate through a social situation of a couple who are arguing. But the nuances of human communication, mapping that in procedural environments will make kind of these experiences way more believable. I think.
The sort of the other side of the spectrum as well. I think it's not just about what's happening with devices and sound and haptics. It's about wrapping the experience around the user in their everyday life as well. It's about making the content as accessible as possible, being really smart with your content delivery network, and at what time the user's touching the content and how they see it, and how it sort of seamlessly transitions from viewing it here and then viewing it there. And it's sort of a seamless transition rather than feeling disjointed. So there's these lovely things happening with devices and this new technology as well, but we can also be a lot smarter about how the users experience it with their everyday platforms and devices.
Great, fantastic. So we're actually going to open to questions soon, and in the event that we don't have questions for the whole time, we may show actually James's last video to end on. So that's the second last video on the deck. Please feel free to come down to the microphone for questions. In the meantime, I just want to ask one last question of the panel. So fairly briefly, can you give me an answer to this question? So in a future hypothetical world where there are no technological nor financial barriers, and we've worked out kind of how to really engage audiences with storytelling in the interactive area, I'd like each speaker to briefly outline their dream for interactive storytelling and what they would need to get there. So if you could do anything that you wanted in this area, what would you do? What would really excite you?
I guess I'll start. I guess the cop-out answer for me would be if you've seen the film Her. I mean, that's pretty out there, you know. That I think that level of artificial intelligence, and I think there's all these great technologies and stuff, and we say don't use technology for technology's sake. But if it's this big all singing, all dancing in the future kind of thing, I think we'll embrace these technologies. I'm working on a project at the moment where we're using machine learning to understand human behavior and therefore to be able to kind of curate the experience based on what the users are doing. I think all of those things, I guess, when we can bring the scale down and the cost down and the development time and all that kind of stuff, and make things completely deviceless, that whilst I'm quite nerdy and like playing with programming languages and software, I really like books and I like wood and physical things. So for me, I'm a big advocate of Cube because I like the fact that we did something with a physical object rather than a shiny metal device.
Yep. Chris?
I heard a similar question on a panel once, and the answer was good. He just said, I want to have sex in the experience, which is like, and then next one said, I want to cry. And I guess the whole point is there's human experiences. But I think what I would want to work on, and I think what's fundamentally interesting about interactive story is, I think it's the first time that it can fundamentally enhance our capacity to understand things. So story has always been there to understand the world, but if we have these immersive environments where we can tell human stories, like even, there's some great work, I won't go into it on the side, but the ability to basically be in an environment, have a human story, and then replay it again from a different perspective and actually make dramatic agency in that environment so you can kind of change the effects, then reassess it, is kind of this like it'd be a really interesting space where we can actually kind of, I think, and will result in a much more empathetic medium, which is good. But it needs that dramatic agency to be able to change, and that'd be.
So I mean, there's versions of that at the moment with immersive journalism. So there's a couple of immersive journalism pieces that are about Syria. And so you actually go and have an experience through a Syrian girl's eyes about what life is like there.
Yeah, her name's, I do want to say it because I always get it wrong. It's Nona de la, I think it's Pella. But yeah, she does some amazing stuff. So, and I guess that's what I'm hinting at, is just the best storytelling on any medium has always been best at describing the human experience. And so this technology is just going to be a different way of doing it, and a more expressive, hopefully a more impactful and empathetic way of doing it.
That's good. That's good. And what about you, Joel? Do you want to?
Yeah, I'd love a database of users who are committed and interested in being a part of immersive experiences. My biggest frustration when we create one is often the onboarding and sort of breaking the fourth wall and breaking the user's trust immediately by
stalking them.
Yeah. I like doing that. But by having to, get a whole lot of permissions and things like that we have to do, that immediately removes people from the idea that they're part of an immersive story. It would be really nice to at least have a small group of people that you could just push a story to and have them sort of immediately immersed in something. And the second part to that is, I think it'd be really nice to be able to, instead of like what I did with Kill Me 3 Times, having a video which, yes, it tries to tell a story, but it's not particularly relevant to anybody who doesn't live in Western Australia and they're in broad daylight in that location. It'd be nice to sort of start building these micro personas of people based on little bits of information that we can get from them, and using machine learning to sort of create these introductory videos around what we can figure from them, or what we know about them, and sort of creating the story around what we know about them rather than assuming that they are, up to a certain sort of behaviour.
That would be fantastic. Okay, so we don't, is that a question over there? Are you,
Yep.
yes?
Yep.
What's your name, please? Yep.
Hi, Andrew is my name.
Hi.
Question is in regards to client buy-in, and mainly probably more directed at Chris, but I'm more than happy to hear other input as well. But
Sorry, did you hear that? Can you repeat
can you hear
it?
that? Sorry, is that better?
That's better.
Okay. Yeah, it's mainly in regards to client buy-in, and as I said, probably more directed at Chris, just given those sort of technologies, but happy to hear other inputs as well. But it's very difficult when obviously you're working with new mediums and obviously wanting to tell interesting stories. How do you communicate that during that process of development to a client? Like, what tools would you use? Traditionally, with a magazine or a video, you can obviously show mock-ups, but in these instances, you might have a stronger understanding of the potential, but how do you sort of communicate that so they might understand, obviously, some of these nuances of emotion and expression and everything like that? So, yeah, just interested to hear how you kind of go through that process.
It's really hard, and you go through like 100 pitches or whatever and only get a few because everyone's like, wow, but some people only getting them to put their money down is quite a bit harder. But what we've found is most effective now, and which is why we've started doing this a lot more, is particularly with something like VR, is the minute you put they have the experience, get them to have the experience in another kind of fashion, they're like, wow, and then you go, you can do this, and they go, this is how it would work for you. So for us, it took a long time to be even in a business position to invest in that, to show them those demos and demonstrations. And it gets a bit easier with reputation once you've had a few good case studies with other clients. They want to replicate the results. Everyone loves to copy and do something. What else? So I think it's getting easier the more other agencies are doing this creative tech as well. But it's largely, I guess what else do we do is we try and take the ease off them by creating a prototype phase as well. Say like, all right, you don't have to buy in 100% to the project right now. Give us this amount of budget. We'll create this kind of experience to prove its feasibility, and then get them to buy into that as well. But it's largely, I feel like I'm just selling, sometimes it sounds like you're selling snake oil, but also be just fair enough and just go, look, this isn't about being a gimmick, because a lot of them are scared. I think some people have bought into things, gotten burnt because it was a crap experience and never want to do it again, and that hurts everyone. So be realistic what you can achieve, and I think, yeah. Sorry, I can't be more, there's no...
Thanks.
Next question.
Hi, thank you for the sharing today. And firstly, I want to make a comment on the Magic Leap stuff. And actually, the magic trick behind the Magic Leap is calling augmented reality. It's not virtual reality. It's AR instead of VR. So you want to know about the trick, if I'm free to talk, and come to me. And second one, I want to is more a request, because I come from the operation is the AR and VR company. We highly required the 360 video and 360 content. Just a quick request, if you can have some minutes after this session, talk to you guys about this kind of thing. Last, there's a question about the limitation. From my understanding of what VR can do, the 360 video, it have to set up the 360 camera in front of there, stand still, you can see the view. But can we move the camera? I mean, it's not a full experience. That's still the limitation of this technology, or do we have some new technology is onboarding and they can give the real 360 view? So
sorry, so just to be clear, is you're asking, can you move the camera, essentially,
yes,
in 360 video?
For the 360 video and no shaking, it's just like frame, this kind of stuff.
So look, great example. The Wallabies one, our first thing we wanted to do was put a headset up, put it in the line out, put it in the scrum. So, and then, doing that smoothly is fine. Your biggest problem is that disconnect. So we expect from our reality an expectation, and then when we can't do it. So if your camera is moving or in your head and you are not moving, you think you're being poisoned, so you literally want to throw up. Like that's the motion, part of the motion sickness.
I understand that there's a limitation of the, let's say you are talking about the Oculus SDK, just assuming you're talking about using that technology and using the VR gear and the Oculus stuff. What I'm talking about, let's forget the limitation of the technology, what kind of SDK we are using. Let's back to the topic of if that's possible, just have the digital content. I mean, if that's possible, to take the 360 videos, I mean the dynamic one, not static one.
It'd be possible, it's just very it'd be an expensive exercise, I guess, yeah.
I know. I mean, that's the reason I'm here jumping in to ask the question. I mean, we have the client is ready. Just we're still waiting. Have a highly requirement about that. I just want to know if there's anything we can do. It's not about money. It's about is that possible or not. That's my question.
Cool. Well, maybe we'll catch up after.
Yeah.
Thank you,
this.
George.
So, does anyone else have any other questions? Have we got time to play James's Subaru video? Yep. No, we're finished? One more. Okay, so can we play the... James, do you want to just quickly introduce this video?
Yeah, this was a recent project for Subaru. It's called Wawa X. And it was a film we created for a repositioning exercise. And it's very much an experiment that Subaru are doing at the moment. It's a content piece. But everything you see on the car, we actually built. So you'll see a guy called Hart, who's a guitarist who's from here in Melbourne. And the idea was they wanted to drive a car with a wah-wah pedal. If you don't know what a wah-wah pedal is, it's a guitar effects pedal. It gives it that kind of Jimi Hendrix crying sound. We'll play the video, and you'll kind of see what happens, but it's very much an experiment. It's interesting that a brand wanted to go in this direction, especially Subaru, but it's had some great response.
It was cool because, like, yeah, the car was definitely the instrument.
Hello?
Hey, my name's Darren, better known as Hearts. Music gives me the opportunity to express myself in more ways than one, and obviously the wah pedal's a big part of that. Hendrix was a big adopter of the wah pedal super early. Songs like Voodoo Child. Yeah, it's the classic rock kind of sound.
Yeah, I should probably talk about the WRX, eh?
Subaru came to me with the idea of having a accelerator be a wah pedal, as in a guitarist's wah pedal.
Open up and have a look, but in theory, yeah, that's the way we do it.
Yeah, the tech dudes were really cool. It was a unique wah pedal that they actually made for this.
I just wanted to see how they actually pulled that off. You know. Hey man, how are you?
Good, how are you?
See ya.
Yeah, likewise.
We're gonna like structure out your song, and then the performance in the guitar is gonna be me,
Yep.
and you using the wah pedal, and
Yep,
then using the car as the instrument.
Yep.
As Rich was driving the car, he kind of had to operate it like a wah pedal, and there was a collaboration between me and him.
So we'll rev it for a bit, and then when you're ready to go, you let me know, and then go 1, 2, 3.
That was a challenge for Rich to figure out how to operate the car and the wah pedal at the same time.
So the wah's not working now. So by the time I get the wah down, it's like, oh, time to stop and slow down. So I kind of have to...
Yeah, it's all or nothing. Yeah,
Yes.
there's no.
But once we went on the straight strip, we had a lot more space and speed to really operate the wah pedal properly.
Definitely a cool experiment. I don't want to say rowdy.
Thank you very much. I think we probably need to end it there. Can we have a round of applause for the speakers? Thanks.